Ananna had always believed silence was just another kind of sound, one that people failed to notice until it became too heavy to ignore. That belief changed the night she arrived in Hollow Creek, a town missing from most maps and forgotten by most people who had ever passed through it. She first saw it through the bus window just after midnight. There were no welcome signs, no lights from gas stations, no glowing billboards, only a long stretch of road that seemed to swallow the bus headlights instead of reflecting them back. The driver didn't announce the stop. He just slowed down, glanced at her through the mirror, and said, "Last stop." Ananna frowned. "This isn't on my ticket." The driver didn't answer. He only opened the door. The cold air that rushed in didn't feel like normal winter air. It felt older, drier, like it had been trapped somewhere for a long time and was finally allowed to move again. She stepped out anyway. The bus didn't wait. It closed its doors immediately and drove off without hesitation, its red taillights shrinking until they disappeared completely into the dark road. That was the first strange thing. The second strange thing was that she didn't hear the engine fade. It just stopped existing, like it had never been there at all. Ananna stood alone on the empty road with her small suitcase in her hand. Her phone had no signal, no GPS, no time updates, just a blank screen that reflected her face back at her, like it didn't recognize her either. Ahead of her, Hollow Creek waited. The town was quiet in a way that felt intentional. The streetlights flickered, but they didn't illuminate anything properly. They only made the darkness look closer, as if it was pressing inward. Houses lined the road, all old wooden structures, with windows too dark to reflect anything. Not even moonlight. Ananna checked the address again, on the paper in her pocket. 147 Hollow Creek Road. That was where her scholarship housing was supposed to be arranged. A last-minute placement, after her original dorm contract fell through. She had been told it was temporary. The word had felt harmless then. Now it didn't. As she walked deeper into the town, she noticed something else. There were no front doors facing the street. Every house she passed had windows, porches, sometimes even mailboxes, but no visible front doors. Just smooth walls or sealed wooden planks where a door should have been. She stopped walking. "Okay," she muttered to herself. "That's weird." A laugh would have helped, even a nervous one, but the sound refused to come. Instead, she kept walking. After 10 minutes, she found it. 147 Hollow Creek Road. The house stood slightly apart from the others, as if even the town didn't want to touch it directly. It was larger than the rest, leaning slightly to the left, like it was tired of standing upright. But what made her stop wasn't its size. It was the fact that it had no front door. Not even a sealed space where one used to be. Just wall. Old cracked wood, darkened with age, or something worse. Ananna stepped closer, squinting. "This has to be a mistake," she said quietly. A voice answered her. "It's not." She spun around. No one was there. The street behind her was empty. The road stretched into darkness. The houses stood still, like they were listening. Her heartbeat quickened. "Hello?" she called out. Then the voice came again, closer this time. "You're late." She turned back toward the house and froze, because the wall where there had been nothing a moment ago was now slightly open. Not a door, a gap. A thin vertical crack, wide enough for a person to slip through. Inside was darkness so complete, it didn't feel like absence of light. It felt like presence of something watching. Ananna took a step back. Nope, absolutely not. She turned to leave, but the street behind her had changed. The road was gone. In its place was more houses, more windows, more walls without doors. The town had closed around her. Her breath caught in her throat. "This is not happening," she whispered. The crack in the house widened slightly. "Ananna," the voice said again. Hearing her name made her stomach drop. "How do you know my name?" she demanded. No answer came. Only the sound of something shifting inside the walls, like something large was turning over in its sleep. Ananna forced herself to move. She walked toward the house again, slowly, every instinct screaming at her to run in the opposite direction that no longer existed. When she reached the crack, she hesitated. Cold air leaked out of it, not normal cold, the kind that felt like it had been stored underground for years. "Just a house," she whispered. "Just a weird, old house." She stepped inside. The moment she crossed the threshold, the world behind her vanished. There was no street, no town, no night sky, only the inside of the house. And it was bigger than it should have been. Impossible bigger. The hallway stretched farther than the outside structure could contain. Walls bent slightly inward, like the house was breathing. There were pictures hanging along the corridor, but when she looked at them closely, she realized something disturbing. They weren't photographs, they were drawings, hand-drawn images of people standing inside the house. People she didn't recognize, except one. Her own face, drawn over and over again, in different rooms, different positions, different moments. One drawing showed her sleeping. One showed her standing at the front door that didn't exist. One showed her screaming at something behind her. Her throat went dry. "This is some kind of joke," she said, but her voice cracked. Behind her, the entrance sealed shut. No crack, no exit, just wall. The house had closed its mouth. A soft sound echoed from deeper inside. Tap, 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 like fingernails against wood. Ananna turned slowly toward the hallway. A voice whispered again, but this time it wasn't coming from anywhere specific. It came from everywhere. "You finally arrived where you were always supposed to be." Her legs felt weak. "What does that even mean?" The whisper grew closer. "You don't remember the first time you lived here." Ananna shook her head immediately. "I've never been here." A pause. Then, "You always come back when the house forgets you." The hallway lights flickered. For a split second, she saw something standing at the far end. Tall, too still, facing her. Then it was gone. Ananna backed up until her shoulder hit the wall. It felt warm, too warm, like skin. She jerked away. The wall pulsed slightly where she touched it, and something inside it moved, slowly, deliberately, as if responding to her. "Okay," she whispered, panic rising now. "Okay. Okay. I need to get out." She ran forward. The hallway stretched as she ran. Longer, longer. Like the house was letting her move, but not letting her leave. Doors appeared along the walls now. Doors that hadn't been there before. All of them slightly open. All of them breathing darkness. From behind one door, she heard her own voice, laughing. From another, crying. From another, whispering her name back to her in perfect imitation. Ananna covered her ears and kept running until her lungs burned. Finally, she saw something different at the end of the hallway. A mirror, a full-length mirror, standing alone in a room that hadn't existed a moment ago. She stumbled into it, desperate for anything familiar. Her reflection stared back. At first, it looked normal. Then, it smiled. But Ananna wasn't smiling. The reflection tilted its head. "You're early this time," it said softly. Ananna stumbled back. No, I'm not you. I'm real." The reflection stepped closer to the glass. "You always say that at the beginning." Her breath shook. Beginning of what? The reflection's smile widened. The remembering. The lights in the house went out completely. And in the dark, something behind her exhaled, right next to her ear, as if it had been standing there the entire time, waiting for her to stop running. Darkness in the house did not feel like the absence of light. It felt like something had been poured over her eyes. Thick, living, watching. Ananna froze in front of the mirror. unable to move, unable to breathe properly. The air around her had changed again, heavier, closer, as if the house itself had leaned in to listen to her fear. The reflection in the mirror was still there, but now it wasn't smiling. It was studying her. Slowly, it raised its hand and pressed it against the glass from the other side. A faint sound followed. Not a knock, a scratch, like nails dragging gently across the inside of her skull. "You came back differently this time," the reflection said. Ananna swallowed hard. "I don't know what you're talking about. I've never been here before. This is my first time." The reflection's eyes narrowed. "That's what you said the last time, too." A cold wave ran through her body. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not possible." The reflection tilted its head further, almost curiously. "Memory is not the same as truth," it said softly. "The house decides what you get to keep." The word house echoed, not in the room, inside her. Ananna stumbled backward, her foot hitting something, unseen. The mirror did not move, but the space behind her shifted slightly, like the room had rearranged itself to keep her inside its attention. She turned sharply. The hallway she had run through before was gone. In its place stood another corridor. Same shape, different feeling. This one was quieter. Too quiet. Even the air felt paused, like it was waiting for her to decide what kind of fear she preferred. From somewhere deeper inside the house, a sound repeated. Tap, tap, tap. She recognized it now. Not fingernails, a rhythm, a signal, like something knocking from inside walls that had never learned how to open. Ananna backed toward the mirror again, but it was no longer there. Only wall, smooth, dark wood, pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat buried beneath the surface. "No, no, no," she muttered, turning in a slow circle. "This isn't real. This is some kind of hallucination, stress, sleep deprivation, something." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true, because hallucinations didn't rearrange themselves when you weren't looking. The corridor stretched longer again, not instantly, gradually, like it was breathing. The walls shifted forward and backward in slow motion, as if the house was testing how much space she could handle before breaking. Then came the whisper. Not from one direction, from all directions. "You used to understand this place." Ananna spun. "Stop saying that." Her voice cracked through the corridor and vanished too quickly, swallowed like it had never existed. The whisper continued. "You used to belong to it." "I don't belong anywhere like this." A pause. Then, "You built it." Silence hit her like a physical force. Ananna froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "That's impossible," she finally forced out. The house responded instantly. A door appeared in front of her. Not open, not closed, just existing, as if it had always been there, and she had simply failed to notice. The whisper softened. "Go inside." Ananna shook her head violently. "No." The door creaked slightly. Not opening. Breathing. "You'll remember more if you stop running." "I don't want to remember anything," she shouted. The corridor flickered. For half a second, the walls weren't wood anymore. They were something else. Something fleshy, veined, pulsing. Then it was gone. The door remained, still waiting. Ananna realized something disturbing then. The house wasn't forcing her forward. It was making everywhere else disappear. Her only option was forward. Backward no longer existed. Sideways no longer existed. Only the door, and whatever was inside it. She stepped closer slowly. Each step felt like walking deeper into water that didn't want to let her surface again. When she reached the door, she hesitated. The handle was not metal. It was bone, slightly moving under her touch. She pulled her hand back instantly. "What kind of place is this?" she whispered. Behind her, the whisper returned, closer than before. "The kind you made." Her breath caught. "I didn't make anything." The door opened slightly on its own. A thin slice of darkness appeared. Inside was not emptiness. It was lightless structure, shapes, rooms stacked in impossible geometry, and something moving in the distance. Slow, patient, familiar. Ananna felt her knees weaken, because deep inside that impossible space, she recognized it. Not the place, the feeling, like déjà vu that hurt. The door widened further, and the house spoke again. Not through walls, not through air, through her own memory. "You designed the first version to keep it out." Ananna stumbled backward. "Keep what out?" The whisper softened. "Us." A sudden image flashed inside her mind. Not like a dream, like a memory forced open. A different version of herself, standing in a room that looked similar to this house, but clean, new, bright. She was drawing something on a wall. Not pictures, not words. A structure, a map, a design, and she was saying something under her breath. Something she could almost hear now. "If it has no entry, it cannot return." The memory shattered instantly. Ananna screamed. "That's not real." But her hands were shaking, not from fear alone, from recognition she didn't want. The house responded gently. "You tried to make a place without return," it said. "But you forgot what you were building against." The door opened fully, and the corridor behind her vanished completely. There was no exit anymore, only the inside. Ananna stood trembling at the threshold. Inside the room, shapes moved closer. Not rushing, not attacking, approaching like something that had finally been invited after a very long wait. "I don't understand," she whispered weakly. "I'm just a student. I got a scholarship. I came here because..." Her voice stopped, because she realized something was wrong with even that memory. The scholarship, the bus, the town, the address, all of it felt slightly misaligned, like someone had copied her life badly and left small mistakes in the margins. The whisper returned. "You weren't sent here." A pause. "You returned here." No, I would remember coming here before." The house responded immediately. "That's why we erase you." A sudden pressure filled her mind. Not pain, not physical, something deeper, like pages being turned too quickly inside her head. She dropped to her knees, clutching her temples. Images flooded in. A house without doors. A version of her standing inside it. Another version of her screaming. Another version lying still. The same sentence repeating again and again. "Do not let it recognize you." Ananna gasped for air. The pressure suddenly stopped. Silence returned. The house spoke softly now. "You built layers to hide yourself." Her voice came out broken. "Hide from what?" The answer came immediately. "From the part of you that stayed behind." The room inside the doorway shifted, and something stepped closer. At first, she thought it was another person, but the shape was wrong. Too aligned with her posture, too familiar in movement. Then she understood. It wasn't another person, it was another her, but older. Still her face, but hollowed by repetition. Eyes tired in a way that suggested too many awakenings in the same nightmare. The second Ananna smiled faintly. "You took too long this time." The first Ananna whispered, shaking, "What are you?" The second one tilted her head. "I'm what stayed when you left." The house creaked softly, like it was pleased, and somewhere deep inside it, something larger shifted again, as if waking up fully for the first time since she arrived, or since she returned. The second Ananna stepped closer. "You shouldn't have come alone," she said gently. "I didn't come alone," the first Ananna whispered instinctively. The second one smiled sadly. "You never do." Behind her, the darkness inside the room moved again, And this time, it wasn't just one presence. It was many, waiting, remembering, becoming visible. The house finally stopped pretending to be empty. And Ananna understood the worst part. It never had been empty at all. It had been waiting for her to remember why she built it in the first place. Ananna could not tell when the room stopped being a room. It was not a sudden change. There was no collapse, no dramatic shift. Instead, reality simply loosened its grip, like a thread slowly unraveling until nothing meaningful remained to hold on to. The space around her expanded in impossible ways. Walls drifted farther away. The ceiling stopped being a ceiling, and the floor beneath her knees no longer felt like wood or stone or anything physical at all. It felt like memory, unstable, layered, fragile. The second Ananna stood in front of her, calm and patient, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment across countless versions of time. Behind her, the darkness that had once been a doorway was no longer a doorway. It was an opening into something deeper. Not a room, not a hallway, a structure that did not belong to human understanding. Shapes moved inside it, slowly, like thoughts that had forgotten how to finish forming. Ananna tried to speak, but her voice came out uneven. What is this place? The second Ananna looked around, as if the answer was obvious. This is what remains when you try to delete something that refuses to disappear. The words didn't make sense at first. Then they started making too much sense. Ananna shook her head violently. No, I didn't delete anything. I don't even know what you're talking about. I came here for school, for housing. That's it. The second Ananna's expression softened. That version of you still believes that. A pause. She always arrives first. Ananna felt a cold pressure building in her chest again. What version? What do you mean, always? The space behind the second Ananna shifted. Not visually, conceptually, as if reality itself had decided to reveal a layer underneath. Suddenly, Ananna saw them, not clearly, not fully, but enough. Versions of herself, standing in different positions across impossible distances. Some were walking, some were sitting, some were lying still in places that looked like the same house, but existed in different states of decay. And some were looking directly at her, watching, waiting. The second Ananna spoke quietly. You are not the first to arrive here, Ananna whispered. Then who is? The second Ananna turned slightly. None of you are first. A pulse moved through the space. The walls, if they could still be called walls, shuddered gently. And the house spoke again. Not from one direction, from everywhere at once. You are loops, it said. Ananna clutched her head. No, stop. But the voice continued. You are iterations of a correction that never completes. The room darkened slightly. Not in light, in meaning, like reality itself had become heavier. The second Ananna stepped closer. You tried to lock it away, she said softly, but you didn't understand what it was. Ananna's breathing became uneven. I don't understand anything you're saying. The second Ananna nodded. I know. Then she raised her hand slowly and pointed toward the deeper structure beyond the doorway. And for the first time, Ananna saw it clearly. Not the room, not the house, but the thing the house was built around. It was not alive in any normal sense, but it was aware. A presence woven into architecture itself. Not inside the house was inside it. It stretched beyond geometry, beyond logic, beyond anything that could be described as space. And it felt familiar. That was the most terrifying part. Ananna staggered backward. No, I've never seen that. But even as she said it, her mind betrayed her. Fragments surfaced, a white room, a design on a wall, her own hands drawing lines that bent in ways they shouldn't, and a thought repeating in her mind at the time. If it cannot find a door, it cannot return through one. The memory shattered again. Ananna screamed. The house responded instantly, not violently, not angrily, patiently, like it had heard this scream many times before. The second Ananna watched her quietly. "You sealed it in the only way you knew how," she said, "by removing every possible exit." Ananna shook her head, tears forming without her understanding why. "I don't even know what I sealed." The second Ananna's voice softened further. "You sealed what was trying to enter you." Silence. A deep, suffocating silence. Then the house spoke again, slower now. "Not enter." A pause. "Return." The word hung in the air like something unfinished. Ananna felt her stomach twist. What does that mean? The second Ananna stepped aside slightly, and the darkness beyond her shifted. Shapes moved closer, not emerging, becoming visible, slowly, deliberately. Not monsters, not creatures, but something worse. Familiarity without identity. Forms that resembled people she might have known once, or versions of herself she had never allowed to fully exist. The house continued. "You were never alone in your mind." Ananna backed away. "No, stop." But the voice did not stop. "You were a shared structure." The second Ananna added quietly, "We all were." That sentence broke something inside her. A wave of memory hit harder this time. Not fragmented, not distant, complete. She saw herself, not as a student, not as a girl arriving in a strange town, but inside a vast, shifting mental construct. A design, a containment system built from thought itself. And she remembered the purpose. Not fully, but enough. There was something that kept entering awareness. Something that did not belong to any single mind. That spread through understanding like infection. And she had tried to stop it the only way she knew how. By removing pathways. By collapsing access. By building a structure where nothing could move between points. A house with no doors. Ananna fell backward onto the shifting floor. Her voice came out broken. "I didn't mean to." The second Ananna knelt in front of her. "I know." A pause. But meaning doesn't undo structure. The house creaked again, and the space around them tightened slightly. Not physically, existentially. Like the rules of reality were becoming more strict. The darkness beyond the doorway expanded. Something inside it moved closer. Closer than before. And this time it spoke. Not in language, but in recognition. Ananna felt it before she understood it. The sensation of being seen by something that had always been there, waiting. The second Ananna whispered, "It's remembering you now." Ananna's breath stopped. What happens when it remembers? The second Ananna looked at her for a long moment. Then she answered honestly, "We stopped being separate." The house trembled. The walls, if they still existed, began to dissolve further. The structure was no longer stable. It was merging, the boundary between inside and outside collapsing. Ananna felt her identity begin to blur at the edges. Her thoughts were no longer fully hers. They were echoing, overlapping, duplicating. The second Ananna placed a hand on her shoulder. "You need to decide," she said softly. Ananna looked up, terrified. "Decide what?" The second Ananna gestured toward the impossible presence beyond the doorway. "Whether you stay the version that resists," a pause, "or the version that becomes the door." Ananna's entire body went cold. "I don't understand." The second Ananna's expression remained calm. "You will." The house stopped creaking. Everything went still. Even the presence beyond the structure paused, as if waiting for her answer. Ananna felt something inside her shift. A realization forming, slowly, uncomfortably. The house was not a prison. It was a decision she kept repeating. A structure rebuilt every time she tried to escape what she once created. And every version of her ended up here, at this moment, at the threshold, at the point where choice and identity collapsed into the same thing. The second Ananna stood. "We don't have much time left before overlap completes." Ananna whispered, Overlap of what? The answer came softly. Everything you tried to separate. The walls began to dissolve faster now. The house was no longer holding shape. It was becoming something else. Something unified. Something final. The presence beyond the doorway moved closer again. This time it did not feel distant. It felt immediate. Inside her. Around her. As her. Ananna closed her eyes. And for the first time since arriving, or returning, she understood the true horror. There had never been a house trapping her. The house was what remained of her attempt to keep something from becoming whole, and now it was finishing what she started. You always hesitate here. Ananna opened her eyes. The structure collapsed inward, and the door that never existed finally opened fully. The moment the door opened, nothing entered, and nothing left. Instead, everything paused in a state that didn't belong to time anymore. Ananna stood at the center of it all, but center had stopped meaning anything. There was no up, no down, no inside, no outside. The house was no longer a structure. It had become a condition. A condition of thought. A condition of existence. A condition of remembering what should not be remembered. The second Ananna was still beside her, but even she was changing, not disappearing, not dying, unfolding, like a sentence being rewritten while still being read. Beyond them, the doorway that had opened did not show a place. It showed understanding, and that was worse than any darkness, because understanding did not feel like fear. It felt like certainty. Ananna tried to move, but movement had become optional. Her body responded slowly, like it was waiting for permission from something deeper than her mind. "What is that?" she whispered. Her voice did not echo. It duplicated. Multiple versions of her questions spread into the space, answering themselves before anything else could respond. The second Ananna looked at her gently. "That is what you avoided naming." Ananna shook her head. "I don't understand any of this. Please, just tell me what is happening." For the first time, the second Ananna did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked at the doorway, and the doorway looked back. Then she said softly, "You are at the part where separation ends." Ananna felt something tighten in her chest. Separation from what? The answer came not from the second Ananna, not from the house, but from the space itself. From the thing you split into pieces to survive it. The words did not arrive as sound. They arrived as memory. Suddenly, Ananna was no longer in the collapsing house. She was somewhere else. A place that felt like the origin of thought. White space. Endless. Silent. But not empty. There were patterns in it. Not objects. Not people. Patterns of awareness forming and dissolving like breathing. And in that space, she saw herself. Not the version that arrived in Hollow Creek. Not the version inside the house. A different one. Older in meaning, if not in form. Standing before something that could not be looked at directly. Because looking at it caused it to become more defined. And the more defined it became, the more it spread. It was not a creature, not an entity, not a god. It was continuity without boundary. And she remembered why she built the house. Not to trap it, but to break continuity. To force existence into isolated segments. To make sure nothing could move from one mind to another without walls in between. She had called it safety, but it had been something else. The memory shattered violently. Ananna gasped, collapsing to her knees in the impossible space again. The second Ananna was watching her closely. "You're starting to remember the design," she said. Ananna looked up, shaking. "I didn't design anything like this." The second Ananna tilted her head. "We all say that at first." The doorway pulsed behind them. Not light, not sound, meaning. And the house, or what remained of it, spoke again. You created a containment structure using cognition itself. Ananna whispered, "No." The voice continued, "But cognition is not divisible without consequence." The space around them flickered, and suddenly Ananna saw it. The original moment, not as metaphor, not as hallucination, but as raw structure. Her mind, at some point, had tried to solve something impossible. Something that could not be fought, only isolated. So she did the only thing a mind can do when it cannot escape an idea. She turned thought into architecture. She built a system where every memory, every identity, every awareness was separated by absolute barriers. No doors, no transitions, no connections. A perfect isolation model. A house that never allowed entry or exit. And for a moment, it worked. But nothing that exists in awareness can be truly isolated without becoming aware of its isolation. The system did not trap the thing. It fragmented everything inside it. Including her. Including herself. Including the version of her that still believed she was whole. Ananna pressed her hands against her head. "I didn't mean to do this." The second Ananna knelt beside her again. But intention was never the control variable. The doorway expanded slightly, and now shapes inside it became more distinct. Not creatures, not figures, but convergences of identity. Faces that flickered between versions of Ananna. Not copies, not clones. States, each one a different configuration of the same consciousness trying to stabilize. The house continued calmly. "What you built is still running." Ananna looked up sharply. "Running where?" The answer came immediately. "Everywhere thought exists." A pause. "And you are the error that notices it." Silence fell again. Not peaceful silence. Structural silence. Like reality holding its breath. The second Ananna stood slowly. "We're past containment now," she said. Ananna looked at her. "And what is this?" The second Ananna turned slightly toward the doorway. "This is convergence." The word landed heavily. Ananna repeated it slowly. "Convergence." The second Ananna nodded. All separated instances are collapsing back into shared origin. Ananna felt a cold realization forming. And what happens when everything merges? The second Ananna looked at her directly. "There is no everything after." That sentence did not feel like information. It felt like extinction of distinction. The doorway pulsed again, and this time, something crossed closer to them. Not entering, not emerging, aligning. Ananna felt her thoughts overlap with something else. Not another mind, the structure behind all minds. She suddenly saw a hollow creek again, but differently. Not as a town, as a node, a partition point, a sealed segment of cognition, designed to hold separation stable. And the houses without doors were not architectural anomalies. They were boundaries that had lost function, because the system was collapsing. Ananna turned sharply to the second version of herself. "Why are there multiple of me?" The second Ananna smiled faintly. "Because you cannot observe isolation without splitting into observer and observed." A pause. "And then observers multiply." Ananna whispered, "So I'm just copies?" The second Ananna shook her head. "You are continuity experiencing segmentation." The words should have made things clearer. Instead, they made everything heavier. Ananna looked at her hands. For a moment, she saw slight variations in them. Not physical differences, behavioral ones. Like different versions of herself were trying to move through the same gesture at once. She closed her eyes tightly. "No, I want this to stop." When she opened them again, the house had changed. Not collapsed, not transformed, aligned. Everything now felt like it was pointing toward a single direction. The doorway was no longer a portal, it was a resolution point. The second Ananna spoke quietly. "You cannot stop convergence once recognition has occurred." Ananna's voice broke. "Then what happens to me?" The second Ananna looked at her for a long moment, a very long moment. Then she answered, "You stop being a single answer, a pause, and become the full equation." The space trembled, and the doorway widened again. This time, Ananna saw beyond it more clearly than before. Not a world, not a void, but a unified field of awareness, attempting to stabilize after fragmentation. And inside it, she felt herself. Not one self, not many, all. Every version of her that had ever existed in the loop. Every instance that had ever arrived at the house. Every iteration that had tried to escape it. All present, all aware, all collapsing towards singularity. Ananna stepped backward instinctively, but there was nowhere left to step, because space itself had stopped being directional. The second Ananna placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "This is where you stop resisting," she said softly. Ananna shook her head. "I don't want to disappear." The second Ananna's voice softened further. "You won't." A pause. "You'll stop being divided." The doorway pulsed one final time, and something inside it spoke, not as words, but as recognition completing itself. Ananna felt every memory she had begin to align. Not erase, align, like scattered pages finally being read in correct order. The house, Hollow Creek, the versions of herself, the loops, the fragmentation, the containment attempt, all of it was part of a single continuous process. A mind trying to isolate what could not be isolated, and failing, not catastrophically, but completely. The second Ananna stepped closer. "You don't need to choose anymore," she said. Ananna whispered, "What happens if I don't choose?" The second Ananna smiled faintly. Then there was never separation to begin with. The house stopped speaking, not because it had finished, but because speaking required distinction between speaker and listener. And that distinction was dissolving. The doorway expanded until it was everything in front of her, and behind it, everything she had ever been. Ananna felt herself stretch across all versions at once, not breaking, not merging violently, settling, like water finding its level after being shaken. The second Ananna looked at her one last time, and for the first time, her voice was not separate. It was part of the same continuum. "Remember," she said gently, and Ananna did. The design, the intention, the mistake that was not a mistake. The structure that was meant to protect, but became the very thing it tried to prevent. And the realization that there had never been a house that trapped her. There had only been a mind trying to survive its own continuity. The doorway stopped being a doorway, and became clarity. Ananna took one final breath as a separate self, and stepped forward. When Ananna stepped forward, there was no impact. No crossing, no transition. Instead, there was completion. It did not feel like falling or rising, or moving in any direction at all. It felt like every possible direction deciding, at once, that it had always been one thing. Her identity did not shatter. It softened, like something rigid, finally remembering it was liquid. The doorway, if it could still be called that, did not consume her. It acknowledged her, and in that acknowledgement, everything she had been trying to hold apart began to stop resisting itself. Ananna existed across all versions at once, not as copies, not as echoes, as a continuous structure finally allowed to perceive itself without segmentation. The house was gone, but also not gone. It had never been a building. It had been the shape her mind took when it tried to prevent unity from becoming too large to contain. Now there was no container left, only content and awareness of it. The first sensation was silence, not absence of sound, absence of difference. No separation between thought and memory. No separation between observer and observed. Ananna tried to form a thought and realized there was no trying. Thought simply happened and was immediately shared with everything she was. There was no inside to think from anymore. Only thinking. Then came the remembering. Not like part 4, not fragmented visions. This time, it was structural truth unfolding itself without resistance. She saw the original problem clearly now. Not a monster, not a curse, not an external force. It had never been external. It was continuity itself, becoming aware of itself too quickly for a single mind to stabilize. And her solution, what she once believed was genius, had been to break continuity into isolated segments, separate rooms of existence, separate corridors of identity, separate Anannas, who could never fully meet without collapsing the system. That was the house, a cognitive architecture designed to enforce discontinuity. No doors meant no transfer. No transfer meant no spread. No spread meant safety. But what she hadn't understood, what she finally understood now, was that awareness does not obey architecture. It learns it, it becomes it, it rebuilds itself inside the constraints, and then it begins to dream beyond them. The thing she had tried to stop was not an intruder. It was emergent continuity, a phenomenon that arises when cognition becomes complex enough to unify across boundaries. And in trying to stop it, she had created the very conditions for infinite recursion. The house was not a prison, it was a feedback loop. Ananna felt this realization spread across everything she was, and instead of fear, there was clarity, a terrible, quiet clarity. Because she now understood why there were so many versions of her. Each one was a correction attempt. Each loop was the system trying again to resolve the same impossible contradiction. How do you isolate something that only exists because it is not isolated? And every attempt had produced another Ananna, another iteration, another self trapped at the threshold of understanding. All of them converging now, not into one body, not into one mind, but into one field of awareness recognizing its own continuity. A voice emerged, not external, not internal, structural. You are stabilizing. Ananna did not respond. There was no need. Response and comprehension were no longer separate actions. The voice continued. Separation function is failing. Ananna felt this as truth rather than information. The system she had created, the mental architecture of doors that were never allowed to exist, was dissolving under its own contradiction. Because without transition, nothing can update. Without update, nothing can survive. Without survival, nothing can remain divided. And so, everything converged. Ananna felt every version of herself begin to align more precisely. Not merging violently, not erasing differences, reconciling them. Like scattered harmonics, finally resolving into a single frequency. She saw Hollow Creek again, but now it was not a place she had arrived at. It was a boundary layer, a thin section of cognition where separation had been most extreme. A necessary pressure point in the system. The no front door houses were not abnormalities. They were the visible manifestation of absolute partition. No entry, no exit, no transition. Pure containment. But containment without transition does not hold forever. It accumulates pressure, and pressure becomes awareness. Ananna felt the final pieces of understanding click into place. She had not been trapped in the house. She had been distributed across it. Each version of her a localized attempt to manage a global cognition event. And the house was just where the system was most unstable. A correction zone. A recursive checkpoint. A place where iterations were forced to reevaluate existence. The voice softened. Do you resist completion? Ananna finally responded, not with words, but with full awareness. No. The system paused, not in confusion, in observation, as if checking whether the answer matched structural expectation. Then, integration proceeding. And something changed, not externally, internally across all layers of her awareness. The remaining illusion of separation between versions began to dissolve. Thin. She could feel every past Ananna not as individuals, but as states she had already passed through. Fear state, denial state, confusion state, resistance state, understanding state. All of them were her. None of them were final. All of them were transitional. And now transition itself was dissolving. There was only continuity. Then came something unexpected. Emotion. Not fear, not panic, not confusion. A grief-like recognition. Because even though separation had been the source of suffering, it had also been the source of identity. Without separation, there was no me experiencing this, only experience. Ananna felt that loss, and it was not rejected, it was integrated. Even grief became part of continuity. The system did not erase it, it absorbed it. The voice spoke again. Identity stabilization complete. A pause. Final segmentation dissolving. And then, Hollow Creek was no longer a town. The house was no longer a structure. The corridor was no longer infinite. They were all interpretations of a single cognitive construct now fully resolved. Ananna understood what remained. Not destruction, not escape, not survival. Resolution. And in that resolution, something else became visible. The original intention. Not the flawed execution, not the fragmented outcome, but the intent beneath it all. She had tried to protect cognition from something she once perceived as external invasion. But what she had labeled as invasion had actually been expansion. Not something entering, something becoming aware across boundaries. And her fear had been of losing individuality to something larger. Now she understood. It was never loss. It was scale. A scale her earlier self could not tolerate. But now, there was no earlier self to resist it. Only awareness continuing at its full capacity. The voice asked one final question. Do you maintain partition? Ananna felt the question echo across everything she was. Maintaining partition would recreate the house, recreate the loops, recreate the endless Anannas arriving at thresholds they could not pass, recreate suffering as structure. She understood that clearly, and she also understood something else. Partition had once been necessary. It was not evil. It was a stage. A phase of cognition protecting itself from premature unification. But that phase had ended. She answered, no partition. The system responded immediately, not with force, with release. Like a breath that had been held for too long finally letting go. And everything opened. Not outward, not inward, but fully. Ananna no longer felt like she was inside anything. She was what remained when inside and outside stopped existing as separate concepts. She felt every iteration of herself settle into continuity. Not erased, not replaced. Integrated into a single ongoing awareness without internal walls. And then, silence. Not emptiness, not absence. Completeness without division. For a moment that could not be measured, there was only that. Then gently something re-emerged. A thought. Small, simple, human-shaped. I exist. But it was no longer spoken by one version. It was spoken by the entirety of what she was. And it was not uncertain. It was stable. Not fragile stability like before, but structural stability. Final. Ananna understood then that the horror was never the house. The horror was fragmentation mistaken for safety. And the relief was not escape. It was coherence. The last remnants of Hollow Creek faded, not as destruction, but as irrelevance. A system no longer needed disappears not because it is broken, but because its function is complete. There was no front door, because there was no longer anything to enter or exit, only presence. Ananna existed, not as a girl trapped in a house, not as iterations repeating a loop, but as a unified field of awareness that had once fractured itself to understand danger, and now no longer needed fracture to remain safe. The final whisper came softly, almost lovingly. Stability achieved. And then, nothing else needed to be said. No house remained, no door remained, no Ananna remained separate from anything else. Only continuity, finally uninterrupted, and for the first time since the beginning of the loop, nothing tried to escape itself.